good evening, everybody, and welcome to this session of Grooming a Sustainable Literate Generation. And to do the moderation for this panel discussion, we have Ms. Sudha Reddy. She is a General Manager, Vice President at Sabio Group. Sabio is responsible in creating products and enable brands to create stories and also understand their customer at a deeper level using app science. Sudha thinks of advertising as a way for brands to share their story with the world, and how her ad performs depends on how well the story is told. So she's a big storyteller. Her past digital experience includes working with the 4-in-4, Cleltra data and everything. And we have a very rich panel today with us. I will hand it over to Sudha to you to introduce the panel and take forward the discussion. And thank you, gentlemen and lady, for being part of this Sustainable Conference of TI. And just to let you know, we have got almost 30,000 plus registrations that are there currently that is happening. So definitely, I feel we will be making some impact definitely in people's life. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Raj, for the introduction. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I actually have an MBA in sustainability, so I do deal with a lot of sustainable topics, and all my alumni are all in climate change at different places. So this is definitely awesome panel. So let me start with the introduction of the panelists. And firstly, we have Ajit Ragnekar. He was the former dean of ISB, and he now heads Research and Innovation Circle of Hyderabad, where they fast track startups to market in agriculture, health, as well as sustainability. Ajit sir, do you have, would you like to add anything to the introduction?
Thank you, Sudha. No, that is perfect. Let's get on.
And then we have Professor Uday Desai. He's the founding dean at IIT Hyderabad. He's the IIT Mumbai Alum, and he's also the founding director, and he's also the director of IIT Chittoor, Sri City. He was also mentor. He has a whole list of credentials that I'm not getting into, but let's hear from him. They said, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone, and thanks. So as Ajit said, let's get on with it. They can always Google us and find our details.
Yeah, definitely. And then lastly, we have Akhtar Badshah. He's the founder and chief of Catalyst Innovators Group. He's also the distinguished practitioner at University of Washington at Evans School of Public Policy and Governance, the business school, the Bothell campus. And welcome, Akhtar, sir. So today's panel is very, very well set up in the sense we have Ajit, who is very closely involved in policy. We have Uday Desai, who is the primary person responsible for education in one of our premier institutions. And then we have Akhtar sir, who is also coming all the way from Washington, DC. So globally, we have local as well as global presence. And so this is going to be a beautiful setup to learn more about sustainability. So let's start with talking about what, in your definition, is sustainability? What does it mean to you? And let's just understand a little bit of what your sustainability journey has been. So let's start with Akhtar, Mr. Akhtar Badshah, and go from there.
First of all, Sudha, thank you very much. And I'm really thrilled to be on this panel with my distinguished panelists, Professor Desai and Professor Ranjekar. It's really a very important topic, right, when we talk about sustainability. But I think, before we talk about sustainability, I would like to just introduce one other element that we need to keep in mind if we really want to be successful around issues of sustainability. And that is purpose. Why are we here on this earth? What is our reason for being? And are we willing to move from a focus on the individual, which is the me, to the focus on the collective, which is the we? And once we start talking about the collective and the common good, then the issues of sustainability become much more tangible, where you are actually not just focused on saying, I need to get rid of this waste. So I will throw the waste out of my house onto the street. Or I will, be very careful about emissions because it leads to climate change. Or I will be very careful about my consumption patterns because it leads to certain other elements. So when we talk about sustainability, and when I think about sustainability, it is really about what is my personal action. And then what are the common consequences, the collective consequences. And I think that's where we need to kind of shift our minds. And then you start looking at these complex issues. Otherwise, people kind of get very caught up in, I don't know what to do about carbon emissions because, I don't generate carbon emissions in the way a factory does. Yeah. So I think that's where we kind of look at it from what are we doing from an individual perspective that adds to the common good. So let me stop here and then I'll come back.
Okay. Professor Desai, do you want to add your thoughts?
Yes. So what I resonate with what Akhtar was saying, I think, completely. But first of all, I'm not a big fan of defining things because sometimes you start defining things, you try to put them in a box, and then it gets sort of constrained. On the other hand, this particular problem of sustainability is too huge. And I don't think even, a paragraph is good enough to describe it except saying this, and I'm sure we'll miss out on something. Okay, so best is to kind of look at it as a problem, as Akhtar was saying. It is a we problem, it's a global problem. It is not something that I'm going to be able to solve by sitting in my home, or even 50 of us or 1,000 of us in a village or 10,000 of a village are able to solve it. This is indeed a very humongous global problem. Okay, so that's, I think, one of the main things. And it's a very complex problem. This is something I think we have to kind of get across. It is by and large, when we deal with problems, they are very localized. If I talk of electrical engineering where I'm there, okay, I look at Maxwell's equation and solve some problems. Very localized thing. Well, this is a very complex problem in the sense, something that I do which looks quite okay to me. I keep my house clean, I dispose my garbage, but there is a chain reaction. The food that I eat sometimes may be creating sustainability problems. From where it comes, how it is transported, by which truck it comes, etc., etc. The refrigeration that is used to transport the food to me. So there is, I don't think we have completely understood, because to me, it's more like it'll be interesting to create a global graph and see the interconnectivity and create some kind of a model out of it. I'm a bit on the border of engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, and very heavy into beliefs like, good computer models today can really give us better understanding, at least understanding, if not solutions. So I think that is one part which we have to look at it. The other thing which I would like to mention, a little bit sensitive, see, we are always too kind of caught up in nation states. Every locality, okay, the city likes to think about, okay, are we a sustainable city? The nation state wants to worry about, are we a sustainable state? I think we need to go beyond that. I think, we have kind of words like patriotism, nationalism, etc., etc. Those are very localized. We need to create a vocabulary which is like something like global patriotism. I really don't have an answer to that, but we need to create a new vocabulary which will really create this feeling that, yes, I am a global citizen. What I do impacts someone living 10,000 miles away and vice versa. I'll stop at this point and we can come back to it.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. I think that's there's so many valid points there. Let's go to Mr. Ajit to get his comments on it.
I'll keep it very simple. I'll say, it is to take personal responsibility for really strengthening equity in the society and balance in nature. And that could mean, as many of the young are doing today, of going on the streets and doing their best, as some of the scientists are doing, solutions, as some of the startups are doing, as some of us are trying to influence the government policy and whatever. But unless each one of us takes ownership and says, this is my problem and each one of us has to do it, that to me is really creating a sustainable society. Thank you.
That's like, those are some very interesting points. So I actually will bring up like a personal story here. And I want to like bring some context and see like all these three elements maybe, which is personal responsibility, and then we versus I, then also talking about a global scale. So for example, I'll talk about my great grandfather. He died at 96, I think, but I remember him as like at 96, he was still all about, he was not like poor guy. He came from a poor background, worked really, really hard, worked in fields, worked in agriculture. And then from there, he came into like owning land. And then at 96, he was still riding a bicycle. And at every point in his journey, I remember the preachings or like the way he led life is that it's never about, he looked at it almost like his village, or he thought about it as like, what's my impact? Like, what am I creating? How is my agriculture creating? And he takes his whole like family and village to progress. So if he can like establish one connection to sell his food, he'll like share it with the whole village. And he would never thought about even like progressing from a bicycle to like a scooter, let alone a car. And then I come to this generation of like parents and all of that. There is a change, which is not just the nuclear family. Those times it's joint families, and like the respect was a little bit more. I'm also bringing in a little bit of spiritual element here, which is like the thought process itself is changed, where they were thinking about it as like that personal responsibility, but like we are talking about the whole village going forward, versus parents. And now our generation has been thinking about peer pressure. Hey, so many people have a car. I need to have a car to have a comfort. I need to like think about having a certain lifestyle. I need to have like Western food, or like this like new, it's become a little bit more capitalistic. And I wonder what has changed, or what do you think has been the evolution of like why this happened? It looks like we went away from we to I. We went away from like taking a social responsibility of village to like just thinking about our own like mentalities. We don't even think about where it's coming from. We just like consume it and throw it. Like, so this consumption environment, like, so I wanted to get your thoughts a little bit. I know stepping here on several elements, but I wanted to see what you guys thought about why this has happened, or what could be done to elevate this, or what's our understanding that's missing here. We'll start with Ajit Rajnekar, and we'll see how we progress.
I think I wish there were some simple answers, and I wish at least I knew about those simple answers. I really don't. I mean, so one can. I think societies go through phases. Okay, so if we see from after the end of Second World War till almost 80, Fabian socialism and socialism was the strongly ruling class. Then from about 80 to almost now, for the last 35, 40 years, capitalism and greed is good kind of philosophy thing. But in the last 5, 7, 10 years, we are beginning to see another shift, societal shift, and a broad spectrum societal shift. Okay, towards society, so conservation, sustainability, etc., etc. So why these shifts happen to these kind of things? Maybe some sociologists can explain. I don't know, but I see these shifts happen, and those are the predominant thoughts. Then that come into the education system, that come into the social discussion, that come into politics, that then influence. That everyone starts talking the same language, right? So that is, I think, one big mistake. The second thing is that while socialism was great and good, I mean, and part of the reason why it happens is because that dominant philosophy does not give you what you are looking for. Because it was really distribution of poverty rather than anything. So when capitalism came, it was to correct that imbalance. Given that imbalance, I think the cause of money became over predominant. So everything was looked at from an economic or a financial return point of we never took into account the societal cost that we as industry were actually using up. Nor did anybody look at societal benefits even today. You know, that fact that Bharat Biotech, which makes life-saving vaccines, is valued less than Swiggy, which delivers food to others, is a complete disruption of the way we think and the way this society. So I think societies go through that phases as societies realize, as some good thinking people realize, first a small number, then a growing number. And I think we're beginning to see that.
Yeah, yeah.
And as we see it, I'm a perennial optimist. And I think, you know, in the next 5, 10, at the same time, the other huge factor that has happened, and I think Uday made a mention to that in passing, we suddenly have transparency and access to data and global connectivity.
Yep.
You know, 50 years ago, I could be shouting here in Hyderabad and even people in Bombay may not hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Today, I can go global and I can create an impact and I have data to back it. So there are lots of things happening, fascinating things happening, good people coming to the fore. I think, again, you know, we have a tendency. The other thing we have is we have this linear tendency to think. The world is a very, very complex, global, holistic system. But how do we think? Oh, there is poverty, so let me give money to the poor. Now solve the poverty problem. We have a linear way of thinking. We never look at the unintended consequences and therefore what it results in. So all of these various things, I think, have come in. And we will go through these, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those are good points. I think one of like the bigger problems is not just the greed, but sometimes it's the linear way. Everyone thinks for themselves, and including systems, including people. So let's go to Professor Akhtar, and to that discussion, I'll add one more question. Are there steps that we can take, or as a society we should move towards, or any ideas that you guys can add? I would love to bring those also into the discussion. So let's go to Professor Akhtar.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, let me just remind our listeners and viewers that the climate summit starts in a few days. The pre-summit has already started, and youth activists are there participating. I think we forget very quickly the past and what has happened in the past, and we kind of always look at what is happening today and say that, oh, today we've started recognizing the issue of climate change. Climate change conversation has started since the 1960s. And there are people who've been working on it for their lives. The 2 Nobel Physics Prize winners, which Professor Uday, Desai mentioned in our pre-conversation, you know, their work actually highlighted how to model carbon emissions and actually got us to focus on carbon as a way that is going to impact society. But Professor Ranjekar is absolutely correct that a shift started happening where commerce and generating wealth, creating wealth, and looking everything at from the eyes of the economy took precedent. But at that same time, in 1992, we had the Earth Summit, which is the first Earth Summit in Rio, right? There are hundreds of thousands of people who actually showed up, activists, indigenous people, people from India, people from around the world, that started calling about that, hey, our Earth is on fire. So we have been doing this for a very long time. So it is not that it is something recent. I think what is recent, and which I think Professor Desai has rightly articulated that, is that today, because of the internet and our ability to inform people in such a broad manner, that is changing the conversation. And 2, data has become transparent. It's no longer sitting in the hands of researchers and hallowed institutions that had super modeling computers to actually work with. Today, data can be accessed and utilized by a lot of people. And what is happening, Ms. Reddy, is that youth are now not just marching. They are actually grounding themselves in the science of what is happening. And from that, they are actually creating action. Right? So when you kind of look at it and say whether it is Greta Thurberg or other activists that are coming out, they are actually showing that there is a power in a singular voice to take action, which can be grounded in data and science. And if you can ground that in data and science, you can start locally. And that local initiative can become a movement, and it can become a global movement, and it can catalyze people. And that is why you're actually seeing action, which is saying, you know, so that you are in that business of healthy eating and food. The consumption of food and the growing of food, particularly meat-based food, has, you know, been quite a disruptor of our climate, right? With methane gas and all of that. Young people are actually not only looking at, okay, we should get people to stop eating this, but they're coming up with innovative alternatives based on data and science. And I think that's where you will see, you know, people are looking at it in terms of biodegradable plastics and saying, okay, you know, people are looking at it and saying, how do we go out and clean up beaches? And how do we actually take issues and transfer these plastic into, you know, building materials? How do you actually look at concrete? Concrete is a massive contributor to carbon dioxide. And people are now looking at bamboo and other ways to create structure. And it was not that people in my generation were not working on this, right? I mean, India has this huge institution on local building materials. Right? CBRI, which is actually doing this research. And, you know, we kind of moved away from earth-based building materials to concrete and others to emulate the West. And now things are coming back because young people are actually taking charge and saying, this is not just nice to do, but we have data to prove why this is actually much more sustainable for the earth. And I think that's the shift that is taking place, which is actually this ability to motivate and mobilize people and to ground it in science and data.
Yeah. I think you brought up super interesting points. So one is data and one is innovation and innovations happening in the space of science and technology. So let's assume, let's go back to that question of science and technology, right? So we have now that Ajit Radnekar also brought up, which is now we have the global presence. We can actually ship medicines from east to west, and people in Africa can be saved from shipping one thing to another. So there is a lot of innovation happening, but that is also leading to a lot of issues. So science and technology is a double-edged sword. It has not only solved some of the problems, but it's created some of the sustainability problems. So let's go into that topic, what you are talking about, which is how can science and technology solve the problems? Especially, I also come from the data-driven space. We have the data now, we have the data to drive it. But as we are talking about, it's creating as many problems as it's solving it. We are actually putting out fires almost, it's not necessarily just stopping the source. So how do, let's go to Professor Desai to hear his thoughts about how do we think science and technology help in solving the problems, or how do we best leverage it so that it doesn't just stop the fires, but we are talking about source as well.
So first of all, I think it is science and technology which will solve the problem. And as you mentioned, science and technology has always been a double-edged sword. Take any invention, even a simple thing like social networks. okay, social media, they are also double-edged swords. So it is inherent in science and technology that it will be, you have a car which takes me from point A to point B, great comfort, but there are so many accidents. India probably has the largest number of two-wheeler accidents and people dying because of that. So I think it has always been, so I'm not too worried about that, partly because, I've spent a lifetime in S&T, little more leaning towards T rather than S. Okay, but I strongly believe that yes, science and technology will solve it. One place where I partly kind of disagree is data is not quite available, in the sense not quite transparent. In a sense, if you want data today for climate change, it is not very easy. Partly I say that because at IIT Hyderabad, I started the department. I shouldn't say we, because the faculty are the ones who run it. I was more of an enabler, a department of climate change. Currently it gives master's and PhD degree, but eventually I would like it also to come down so that it gives undergraduate degree. So this is more to percolate this thinking. It is not that we are going to solve a problem, but there will be at least a group of students on campus who will be thinking about science and technology and how it interacts, and at dining tables, maybe when they have their cultural functions, other functions, this will be talked about. I think we needed a lot more outside the classroom, the discussions of S&T as to how it's going to tackle science and technology. And there are positive things. For example, the ozone layer which was there after the Montreal Protocol, the ozone layer, the hole has shrunk, okay, and it is shrinking. Okay, in 2019, it was the smallest, what they said, compared to what it was in 2000. So, in a sense, if we come together, have faith in science, okay, have faith in technology, I think we can tackle this particular problem. I'm quite optimistic, but it's not going to be easy. My worry is this so-called, what you pointed out through your narration and your personal story, is this individualistic thing which has come up. Now, how will we get around it and really, that way I compliment people like Greta Thunberg, who really talk about at a very, very young age about the global perspective. It is not easy for someone to think at that level. I think it's quite phenomenal. Now, that is the kind of thinking we need to propagate and create that culture. Okay. And there are various means. I would say that the S&T that we are talking about, one will be lab level, okay, at a very high level. Okay. And the data part, which I forgot to mention earlier, is there has to be a data sharing protocol. Today, if I want data from IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, even I will not get it. Forget about you guys sitting in the US. Okay. Though I'm in India, I'm a professor of an IIT, well respected. Ajit is there. He was an IITian, professor at ISB. We will have tremendous difficulty, and after a lot of haggling and this thing, we'll get some teeny weeny bit of it. Okay, which perhaps may not carry that much value. If I tell him that, can you give me online, and I'm not saying it in vacuum. I've tried this in other domains, not in climate change. It is extremely difficult to get data. Everybody talks about it, but access to data is very, very limited. And a lot of our literature, hats off to the two gentlemen, the Japanese and the American, I think, who got the Nobel Prize. They must have had access to data. Japan is right at the forefront. And I visited Japan many, many times because of the collaboration that IIT Hyderabad had with Japan. In fact, I would say that more than Europe and North America, Japan is far ahead and far more conscious in terms of the sustainability issues, in terms of global warming. The last point which I'll make before I close and give it back the thing to you is schools. I think, we are talking at our level, the college students, already their minds are made up to some extent. We need to create programs, modules, activities, right from kindergarten, which deal with maybe comic books dealing with not just Phantom and comic book dealing with, whatever other thing, but dealing with sustainability issues, the environmental issues, the climate change issues. That will have an impact.
Yeah, I think you went into right into my next question, which is spot on, which is, what is the role of schools and colleges in this whole education? As educators, like all of you, what do you think? I think you suggested few things that we could do, which is introduce the syllabus right from when they are kindergarten, and they're doing it. I see my niece, that's 4-year-old. They actually talk about climate change and environment, and she says, Atta, we shouldn't drive the car today because it's let's go to the metro, and it's nice to hear that. So as educators, I want to hear more. Starting with Professor Akhtar, what is our role in the society, or what is the role of educators and schools and colleges in helping like this system foster like that thinking?
Thank you very much. I think after parents, your family, which has probably the most influence on a child that's growing up, educators are the next level of influences and role models, right? So whether you're talking about a primary school teacher, whether you're talking about a middle school teacher, a high school teacher, a college, undergrad, grad, educators have always played a role to model behavior, right? And today, how do you get this part of this information that is needed, that can be turned into quick, digestible, easily understood information that can also become, whether it is comic books or cartoons or whether it is games, that can lead to young people very early on recognizing these issues of consumption, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are talking about all of these things is because of consumption, right? Our economy is dependent on consumption. And so there is a huge challenge that we have. So we have to start looking at it from innovators that are coming in and saying science and technology is going to improve ways in which things get produced. So it allows for the economy and consumption patterns to still remain. But we also have to change behaviors in terms of how we actually think about materials that we are using. There is personal responsibility in terms of how we think about what we do and don't do. And all of that comes from educators. Now at the University of Washington, we live in an environment where we basically believe that our climate is probably one of the best that we still have in terms of what we can enjoy outdoors, whether it is our water, whether it is our greenery, whether it is our other environments that are there, the salmon, all of that is critical for the survival of what we do. So at the university, there is a tremendous amount of focus on it. I think the other piece that I want to introduce is, as much as we are dependent on science and technology and innovation, so that going back to your grandfather, we should not forget the role of indigenous communities and traditions. And look at ways of how that can be revived, that utilizes some amount of technology to allow for scale to happen. But there is a lot of knowledge in there, and that knowledge needs to get utilized. And I think at the University of Washington, we are doing that by bringing in both our indigenous knowledge around climate change and sustainability, and then of course the work that we are doing that is based on science and data, and infusing it across all disciplines. Right? That it is not just, of course, we have the Department of Environment and we have the Earth Sciences Lab and we have the Chemical Engineering Lab, but it is also where I teach policymakers, business. Schools need to talk about sustainability and climate change so that our business leaders understand their action. We need to get our entrepreneurs to start focusing on that right from the beginning. It is not just your unique idea that you have. What is the impact of service delivery startups on the economy? How do you think about it? And so that education only happens in educational institutions, and we need to arm our educators at all levels on some of this information so that they can impart in the most effective way.
Makes sense. I think, you brought up like several interesting points. I think, forgetting indigenous communities and like their learnings actually has been like a big thing that I have seen there's no feedback loop, as in, like, for example, you start from one thing, where it goes, what its effect, what it's coming back to, it doesn't happen. Like agriculture was a good example. There was a time where agriculture used to be grown in such an organic fashion that huskies built like into the huts, or you actually use it like to like light your stoves to cook, or like everything had a loop like of every impact like went to sustain the cycle. And I think that is a little bit missing for sure. And going into, I think I just wanted to, before going into the next topic, I wanted to get Professor Ragnekar's thoughts on this as well. And then I'll get into the next aspect of this also.
Thank you. First of all, my apologies for suddenly dropping off for a short while. I hope you didn't notice it, but my system just crashed and I had to reboot it all over.
No worries.
Okay.
For technology, we know like the problems.
And thanks, Seattle, for it.
I think I completely agree with what both Professor Akhtar Badshah and Uday said. But I think I'll add 2 or 3 more these things again into it. I go back to what I started with. Ultimately when children grow and go into it, whether it's in our public policy education, whether it's in our business education, we completely fail to incorporate societal costs and societal benefits, which I think is criminal, honestly criminal. When our economics only talk about money and money alone without any, just look at the perversity, right? Today, when a vaccine manufacturer comes out with the vaccine and then decides to sell it at a low cost so that everyone can afford it, their share price will get hammered and they will not get money for further research. Now, how perverse is that? We have to change the way our economists look at things. We have to change the way our public policy and our business schools look at things. And we have to incorporate everything from physics. I mean, ultimately, even in physics, right? We used to talk about, okay, one train going from one side, another train going from, why can't I give climate change relevant problems in that? So there are lots of things that we can all do. But I really like what Akhtar Sahab said, and I'll reiterate it. It has to start from home and from each one of us. And if at our dining table, we only talk about, what new car I'm buying and, how much money I made in the share market, then let's not expect that child afterwards to go into school. So I think each one of us must take the responsibility. And I hope it's now evident, 5 years ago, climate change was thought by many people to be esoteric, to be, now, literally in the last 2-3 years, literally we have had fires, right? Blazing fires all over in the most unexpected place, in ridiculous floods, the extremes of saying, at least now, let's wake up, please.
Yeah.
If I may come in, Sudha, spice it up by slightly disagreeing with a few things. Otherwise, everybody is like, this too congenial a group in some sense.
Yeah.
Too much sugar, So I mean, two things. See, sometimes we romanticize so-called, this tribal societies and other societies, as to what they have done. I think there is wastage there also. It is not that everything has been reused. Yes, certain things are, and we can learn certain things from there. We need to be a little more cognizant of it. And there is no way people like me, at least I would say, and I would say people, many billions of people like me, they are not going to go back to that lifestyle. However hard we try. I've tried very much. I think I'm still into the consumption mode. I every day remind myself that when I'm brushing my teeth or washing my hands and the soap is there, I should turn the tap off. Okay, but invariably the tap stays on, and in the middle I remember and turn it off. Okay, and then turn it on once I have kind of scrubbed my hands. Now this is just a small example, but there are many such examples where we have become a victim to our habits. And I'm not a person who believes that we're going to go back in time. And that's not going to happen. We will always move ahead, and things will change, and we have to keep moving towards that. So I agree with Ajit on one hand that yes, the change has to come from home, from school, but I think there has to be an environment for that. I discuss something at home. Why? I discuss cricket at home. Why? Because there is an environment of cricket in the Indian subcontinent, that everybody talks about it. Okay, I discuss movies at dining table. Why? Because that's what it is there. So we need to create now, and that is where the national and global responsibility comes in, as to how we create this environment where we are motivated to talk about these topics rather than talking about simply cricket or maybe in a World Cup or movies, etc., etc. And I think that is where I think, because dining table conversations don't happen in vacuum. There are external forces.
Each one of us takes responsibility, Uday. This is escapism. I'm sorry.
No, not that.
You're escaping your own responsibility.
No, we are doing that. See, I'm not escaping. I'm doing that. But
as the educated people who have power say, I cannot change the way things happen in my family, then I'm sorry. I completely disagree.
No, see, it's not that. See, Ajit, I'm missing the point.
Don't worry.
These are good things. No, I agree with you, as I said, but these are good for the soul. It's not solving any problem. Dining table conversation.
Of course, it is solving problems. I completely disagree with you. I'm sorry, since you started this whole conversation.
I deliberately did that.
Let's be right clear.
Yeah.
To FUFA indigenous society is kind of nonsense. Right? Science and technology has bastardized the society, period. Right? You've taken everything and basically said, we're going to take all of this and just consume the shit out of us so that we can become rich. That has to stop. I think Ajit is absolutely correct. And to say that I at home don't have the responsibility is a cop-out. It's a complete cop-out. We teach our kids to, aap kya banenge? What will you become? We never tell them, who will you serve? Who do you want to serve?
Yeah.
You don't talk that on the dining table. Why the heck are you talking cricket?
Yeah.
You are the father.
I do see
right? Unless we take that on, this world is on fire, right? So they'll say, hum yahan chota karenge, innovation hoga, science will make it happen. No, it's not going to happen. Science are not, science has improved lives, but it is still, because of science, we are in this situation. Because science allowed us to actually create a consumer society. And it is not, it's not going to happen in 10 years.
The one thing, Uday sir, so just to interrupt, the one thing that Professor Desai brought up, which is very interesting. I think this is where my advertising hat comes in. So what he's saying is there is been consumption patterns and all of that. If you can make sustainability cool, for example, you actually the people that respect the storytelling has to be, it has to be all in place, personal responsibility, corporate responsibility, state responsibility, global, all of those need to happen in parallel. But is there a way, I'm thinking about as an advertising, right? Like a campaign that sustainability is cool to the point that everything on media, for example, is with that, with that broader hat. You do cricket, but let's say you talk about two things in cricket, where you're making not turfs, but you're playing on grass, let's say, just because it's sustainable, or making it in every discussion and every element where you thought about as people, society's changed. That is one thing, but how do we as a society move back again is this advertising that needs to come in, which is in every element, where we say small things, slowly we kind of shift patterns, because I believe advertising is good storytelling, but it's also costs so much consumption to increase, but you could reverse it a little bit if you have that global conversations. And I think that's one thought I had to comment on it. But Professor Desai, you were going to add something.
No, nothing. I said it was I didn't say that we should not, talk about this at home or at dining table. I never said that. I think maybe I emphasized the other aspect much more strongly, so that looked as if I'm going to cop out. Maybe I'm a cop out. Who knows? Frankly, and see, my point is that a lot of things that we talk about and do are good for the soul. They are really not having the impact, and we have to look at what is going to have a major impact. This is the age-old story that, look, I am a good human being, so the world is going to be good. I think in climate change, that is not going to work. It'll have to be a lot more than that.
And I think this is this actually goes into our Q&A. Some of the questions are coming up, and I'm gonna try to think about. Have you guys watched Avatar? I don't know if you, it's a
Oh, that old
Japanese
movie.
cartoon.
Avatar is that.
No,
that
not the Avatar movie. It's an animation.
Oh,
So
no.
where I actually bring in that animation because some of you guys were talking about how we need to do comic strips or like cartoons based on this. So there is an episode in Avatar where it talks about chakras and explaining all of that. The reason I bring it up is because it's a children's cartoon, but the idea of like that thing was that you are not disconnected from the universe. It talks about it in a cartoon format. So the way we think about it, everything is so personal that we think like our action doesn't impact 10,000 kilometers or miles away. The butterfly effect, like one thing changes or bee, right? Like bees are like extinct, like what could be like the impact? No one really thinks about it at that scale. So these cartoons actually talk about like a little bit of that. So I do want to get into like that question and more, which is if you as an individual have to think about that 10,000 mile picture or like global picture, you are part of this universe, you're not disconnected. What are like, let's like talk about, I know we talked about policy, I know we talked about linear thinking, like bringing the discussion to the table. If you had to take away, like, let's like say 3 things that you as an individual can do, or you as a parent can do, what are the steps? And that's the questions that we're getting from our like listeners also, which is as a person, what are like the 3 steps, simple steps that I can take to make this happen at home or like my environment? So I'll start with you, Desai. I'm Professor Desai.
Don't start with me. Okay, fine.
Yeah, if you wanna, since we are in the conversation.
Okay. No, I'll go ahead. See, I would, again, I always try to move away from I, me, my family type of thing. As an educationist, I think I would focus on education. I would try to make sustainability, climate change, global warming, the issues which are there as predominant issues in the education chain. So it is not something that will be talked about on the side. So in a part of a course on chemistry, I talk about a bit of the environment. No, this has to become part of mainstream. Like in school, I study physics, chemistry, math. Okay, why can't I have physics, chemistry, math, and whatever you may want to call it, environment, you may want to call it climate change. We have to think of a nice vocabulary so it also, the words which becomes exciting. So I would start at that level that, actually I'm talking PCM in the Indian context. If you look at Indian schools, bulk of the time we emphasize PCM, physics, chemistry, mathematics. I think this component has to also get equally emphasized. So it becomes a mainstream phenomenon, and simultaneously, we have to start this activity even at the university and the college level. That there has to be there. See, that is where it will be talked about. Number 2, I would say that today social media plays a very big role. Like social media seems to influence us a lot more than even the movies and the TV ads and anything else. Now, how do we incorporate this into the social media? My feeling is that they do their own advertisement, they have their own things. It is quite likely that one approaches a lot of social media enterprises, they may incorporate this. So periodically I may get, like I love Kelvin and Hobbes. So I keep on getting Kelvin and Hobbes cartoon periodically in my Facebook page. Why can't we have things related to the environment in a manner that Sudha, you described, more in a humorous manner, more in a manner which is like, more conducive to creating discussions, bringing a smile to my face. Rather than, so that's I would say, the key way of kind of getting to it. Individuals will come in. I think this is the problem where I think individuals are secondary. The collective is primary. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that is what Akhtar started with.
Yeah, I think it pretty much feels like all of those are action items for me to think about in terms of advertiser. That's and we haven't had a chance to talk much about like policies or corporates like responsibility. So Professor Ragnikar, in addition to like taking like the 3 steps, are there some policies that can help with that? So it's like, I want to hear like quickly, like maybe the few steps and like some policies that might help.
Okay, so I'll mix both corporate and government actually in some ways. Okay, so first thing, and I started with this, right, that we somehow don't incorporate social costs and social benefits in our decision making. So I'm saying we have to move to what we used to be called as triple bottom line approach, but whatever it is, the entire social cost. So for example, all of us in business, right? If things are not going well, what is the first thing we do? We look at all our costs and we say, which cost can I reduce? We do that about our contribution to sustainability or to societal degradation. We never do that. Shouldn't we actually say, okay, as an institution, as an organization, this is where I'm really bleeding. What the hell can I do to reduce it? And we are used to doing these things. It's not something new. The other thing I'd say is that what, as in corporates and in business world, this thing is first we create any societal disaster, then we say, oops, we'll put a bandage on it and correct it. So we'll use resources, we'll create wasteful things, and then say, okay, now let me do CSR and correct it. Can we switch our thinking? Design thinking to start first and foremost by incorporating sustainability in the way we design our products, in the way we sell our products, in the way we market our products, everything. Right? So I think those two to me would be two big things I would like to see corporates does. Going to governments and policies and things. If you look at, and I'll talk about my state to a great extent, the state has actually mapped every SDG to various departments and have lots of schemes. So for example, for no poverty, SDG 1, right? We have the Asara pensions, financial support to SC/ST, support to poor farmers. For gender equality, there is girl child protection scheme, there is Arogya Lakshmi, pension for widows, etc. But these are all band-aid solutions. That's number one. Number two is governments are still organized on departmental basis. If I have to really be a total maverick in thinking, I would love to see governments organized around outcomes. So there is a government department for eliminating poverty. Which actually works very closely with that, which is talking of hunger and healthy food and good health and education and so on and so forth. Now, I think we are far, far, far away. But again, these are discussions we must start. Otherwise, we get siloed, knee-jerk reaction approaches. And I think we have to, somewhere or the other, we have to cut that and move towards it.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I think thank you for commenting both on corporate as well as the policy side of it. And let's go to Professor Badshah for his final thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I ran Microsoft's corporate philanthropy and CSR group for a decade. So I have I teach on corporate social responsibility at the university. So the notion, I think that, Professor Ranjekar has made a very clear point there. It's really, that's where it needs to start, that everything needs to start with a design thinking approach with sustainability in mind, right at the inception of what you're trying to do, rather than a bandage. And that's why I kind of came back. I'd like to re-emphasize, at least for Thai, where we are focused on entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs can actually start there because they're starting something. And if they take the holistic approach of purpose, people, profits, planet together, then you can actually have something that can at least, you'll have to retrofit, but at least what is starting new is much more sustainable. So I would absolutely agree there. I'm a little skeptical about social media. I mean, I don't know whether you followed, we had this whole outage yesterday. I mean, there's no way Facebook is actually going to promote anything good. Let's be very clear. I mean, Facebook's algorithm work and they make money by promoting hate. That's now a proven fact. It's not even an argument that their algorithms actually show that engagement happens because of controversies, not because you're actually putting something good out there. And we don't have an alternative social media platform right now to actually say, and we've tried this, right? I mean, I've been working on right now on reducing vaccine hesitancy in India and Nigeria. And we are seeing the vitriolic that is actually coming at us from using Facebook platforms and marketing with them. So I think we need to be a little skeptical in terms of what social media might be able to do. But I think starting from where people go into work, starting from where people actually educate themselves, starting from the home, and the government, if government puts in policies that benefit these kinds of action, you will see more people starting to do that. And I think that the Indian government and governments around the world have tried their best to put in certain policies, but I think more needs to be done.
Yeah, I think just to like wrap it up, coming from like the social media or advertising space, I think there is more that's possible. I think right now, the young youth that are taking charge, like there's 14-year-old, I forget his name, that has about 1 million followers. And these 1 million followers do kind of get tempted by people's words. So there is a little bit, I think it needs to be used. I think it's like less like on Facebook, more on us. But just to wrap up this conversation, I think this conversation I can like talk for another few hours, and there's a lot to be said and done. And I love like the energy of all three of you. And firstly, thank you so much for taking this time to even make this discussion happen, and we'll keep this conversation going. It's not like it's only a beginning. But to wrap up, like the few key points that I do want to talk about is like, one is definitely personal responsibility. And I think going away from like I thinking to we thinking is very important. And whenever we are designing solutions, be it at corporate level or policy level, keep it not non-linear and think about like overall impact rather than like just like creating that product and its impact. Like that's like one of the other takeaways I have done. And like it's the more we can create policies around data, like I think Professor Desai talked about, Professor Akhtar talked about like take more responsibility. And I think like Professor Ragnekar talked about design thinking in all of our products. I think those are like few key things I would like leave the audience with. Just like at every point, keep doing our best. I think the way Gita says it, right? Do your best and leave the rest. And I think all of us have to like keep going that route. And I'll leave that as the final thoughts. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience, for even listening to us. And thank you, professors, for making this super panel happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ty, for thinking of this and making the Thai Summit on sustainability. I think that is quite remarkable. Really,
absolutely. And I do hope that a lot of our entrepreneurs glean some advice and incorporate it into what they want to start.
True. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.
So,
Bye.